Silent Reckoning, Chapter 1, The Confession, Part 1. Before I was even a whisper my mother's thoughts, it seemed as if the world had already forgotten me. I was born on August 25, 1893. The world was completely different then. I still recall the echoes of the horses in the streets, the gallant way in which they trotted along the pavements. The air was clean, almost unnaturally so, and there seemed to be a radiant innocence to almost everything. The clouds in the sky, possibly in response to the purities in our hearts, were enchantingly serene. On and on the days shimmered, never once beholden to the shadows of midnight. All day long I heard soft piano music. The sunlight orchestrated the euphoric melodies, intensifying their auspicious cadences. There was no pain, there was no heartbreak. Whatever darkness existed, whatever melancholy drifted through my frivolous gestures, was ultimately drowned out by the hymns of mourning. My mother had a very strident nature. In various ways, I suppose, she was truly the last of the great Victorian matriarchs. Her expressions were always meticulously conceptualized, having an almost regal disposition. She came from practically nothing, at least from what I understand, but there was always a noble effervescence in her rapport with the world. As I watched her slender fingertips graze over the piano, I often thought to myself, why are the most beautiful flowers always so fragile? Yes, on the shallow surface she maintained a resilient composition, both in manner and in posture. But just beneath the surface of her rubescent cheeks, to her utter and eternal bereavement, existed a delicacy that not even the angels in heaven could expunge. It was her burden to bear, her cross to carry, and her demon to exorcise. One day, when I was about 5, I believe, I entered our small drawing room, my hands and feet trembling against the light swaying of the door. Just a few moments before, my ears had detected the faint sobbing of my mother. Up until that moment, I had never heard her express her emotion so passionately, so poignantly. It was as though all of the melancholy saturations in the world flourished in her visage, in her austere elegance, and in her feline gaze. The evening light was fading, its rhetorical vigor replaced with the artificiality of timidity. The sophomoric candlelight enticed the pervasive twilight, creating a demure haze. The piano released melodic overtures of somber reckonings, completely in sync with the sultry glistenings. I recall, quite vividly in fact, that as my petite hand touched her soft robe, her cries seemed to intensify. Although I can't be precisely certain, it almost seemed as if I represented a spectral grievance from her past. My youthful presence, as opposed to being rife with blissful cultivations, only reminded her of the irrevocable travesties that weighed ardently on her pensive repose. At one time radiating an almost angelic luminosity, her facial lustriousness succumbed to the grayish spectrums of licentious perditions, bereaving her of all purity. "Mother, what is the matter? Why are you crying?" I asked. "Oh, it's really nothing, my dear. Your father, it now seems, will be leaving us for a season. I do not wish to trouble you with the trials and tribulations of the adult world. My sweet girl, savor your innocence while it lasts. You are a flower that has yet to bloom, whereas my petals have already started to decay, to wither into the lonely soils of the earth, forever inconsequential. Mother, don't talk like that. Everything will be all right. Father loves you. I know he does." I said those words, but I did not believe them. Far in the caverns of my tumultuous meditations, to my utter and eternal displeasure, lingered a demoralizing consternation. Painful though it was for me to realize, I knew that my father did not hold even 1 ounce of passion for her, for he was a man of few scruples. Now that I contemplate it, I do not even know if he was a man at all. From my earliest memories, he was always a mercurial abstraction, a faint whisper in the night, and a levity to be forgotten. His imprint was so light, so abstruse in its transfiguration, that I can't even begin to conceive his true elemental resonance. My darling child, you are ignorant of the ways of the world. Love is a fleeting sentiment, useful only insofar as it provides a reprieve from the urbane constraints of life. Sooner or later, with or without our consent, it will dissolve into the twilights of yesterday. Our affections are often behooved by our innate infatuations. At any given moment they can flutter and pulsate, indebted to the divine torches that conceive them, but inevitably, like all finite luxuries, they will return to the havens that human eyes have never gazed upon, for they are fraught with impurities. Mother, I don't understand anything that you say. One of these days, my child, you will. Believe me, you will. My mother was right in her proclamation. As the years progressed, her words became more and more relevant. At that time, I recall that she had a fervently radiant complexion, almost luminous in its orientation, but due to the orchestras of displaced time, the pigments in her skin adopted a wintry aura, their hues akin to ivory snow, their colorations unashamedly sallow in their shadowy unions, provided a release for her various trespasses. It always seemed, at least to me, that her appearance mirrored the seasonal transfigurations in her heart. Her lissom neckline, so very often glossy and elastic, fell prey to the invisible derelictions that reticently demystify all fragile beauties, their erosions stealthy and elemental. Ever so intimately, like a river waiting for rain to descend, her candescent creases tightened, apprehensive for a moment before being endowed with a plethora of symphonic streaks. In that moment I was blessed with 1,000 fatalistic foresights, all of them pointing to oblivion. It seemed like I had spent the first half of my life in that drawing room, sauntering from corner to corner, never satisfied with the musty scents that permeated the suffocating air. The shadings of silver glitter were always eerily opaque, their transparency stoically ambivalent. At best, the light was gesticular and sullen, thriving off the ghost of dead memories. It was a house full of lamentation, destined to endure the fruits of our iniquities. When I reflect back on that period in my life, it always seemed like every prominent event, virtuous or nefarious, occurred within the confines of the drawing room. Furniture came and went, but the loneliness never dissipated. Perhaps most significantly, the genesis of my womanhood blossomed within the salient aromas that had taken possession of my senses. Through the sovereignty of candlelight, I was reborn. As a little girl, the world was a very small place, verging on suffocating in its predilections. But as the floors became more and more elusive to my visual perceptions, a profound liberation washed over my extremities. The corrosive freckles within my lineaments, unflattering and stifling, dissolved into my creamy pigments, lustering the surfaces. At last I had become an emancipated woman, or at least so I thought.